so excited because today I get to speak to the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce at their annual breakfast. So it'll be about 500 people, and I get to share the message of we. Should be a great time.
Okay, good morning. Nothing like some pulse pounding, heart pounding music to go with your eggs, right? Hey, before I get started, and I'm gonna move around a lot, and I may not even stay up here the whole time, so you have to bear with me on that. Before I get started, I wanna offer a sincere thank you. I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be with you here today. I'm a homeboy. It was mentioned, I grew up just up the street in Tampa, born and raised in Plant City. So anytime I get a chance to speak locally, which is it's not entirely all that often, I just value the time. It's special for me. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I don't think we need these, right? So I'm gonna start off with an assumption, and it could go sideways, but I'm gonna start off with one assumption. I don't know many people in this room, maybe a handful, but my hunch is every single one of us entered the workforce with a desire to make an impact. You and I were incredibly optimistic. We were seeking fulfillment. We wanted to do big things. I think that's true of every single person in this room. Some of us even wanted to make a whole lot of money. There's nothing wrong with that either. But I think every single one of us shares in one, if not more, of those wants, those things. And I was no different. I entered the workforce with an incredible amount of optimism. I really, really wanted to make a difference. I started my career in a very humble way. And I can still remember the tiny cubicle for a company that many of you may be familiar with. You guys remember Barnett Bank? Right? So if you ran a business back in the early 90s and you had a problem with your account, maybe you needed to order checks or just maybe want to check a balance because back in those days there really wasn't an IVR or an automated system, we may have spoken because that's what I did from a tiny cubicle. I still remember like setting that cubicle up with my girlfriend's picture and kind of making it my home because it was the launching pad for what I thought was going to be a really incredible career. And it was from that tiny cubicle that I managed to methodically work my way up the corporate ladder. And for the most part, seemingly, my efforts, they were paying off and did pay off. By most standards, I had what you would categorize or describe as a successful career. And I always do air quotes because we all value things differently and how we define success, it varies. I had a run that I'm very proud of. I had the fancy corner office, the kind that has like its own couch and its little conference room. At a couple of locations or a couple of jobs, I even had multiple of those offices around the country. I had really fancy titles, great compensation. Basically everything I always set out to do in my career, I was able to do. And for some context, in my last two roles before exiting corporate America, I led north of 30,000 employees. I had operations in nearly every state in the country and some international operations as well. Massive organizations. I was responsible for leading multi-billion-dollar P&Ls. I had, at one point, I led the world's largest mail order pharmacy, filling 53 million prescriptions a year. I even led the world's largest, at the time, health insurance enrollment operations, and also led 1-800-MEDICARE. So for our Medicare beneficiaries, that was the operations that I ran as well. But in spite of the success, with each passing year of those 28 years, I felt a growing sense of apathy. With every single year, I felt a little less unfulfilled. I found myself kind of disenfranchised from the very environments that I was helping, in many cases, leading to create. Talk about irony. And it was probably around year 24 of my career that I began to question everything. Did the people around me who I thought for years, like I had this circle of people, some even followed me from one company to the next, their respect, I started to learn, was fear. They didn't respect me, they feared me. And as my career continued to kind of climb, and these questions became more and more loud in my brain, I had to start asking, am I the only one that feels this way? Am I the only one that is just done with the toxicity, the duplicity? Or has everybody had the corporate Kool-Aid? And they were just too scared to admit it, maybe too arrogant, or those are just types of things we don't talk about in the corporate world. But I grew tired of the whole machine, man, the bureaucracy, all the dysfunction that I had seen, and again, in many places, I was the one creating some of that dysfunction. But when my health started to suffer around year 24, my marriage was on the rocks. I had to start asking more questions. I had to get to the bottom of why I felt this way. And it started to become very clear that the questions I had been asking throughout the course of my career were not the right ones to ask. And when I started to find the right questions to ask, I stumbled across something that I kind of refer to it as my epiphany moment. And that epiphany is, I think, in many reasons why I'm here to chat with you today. It's also the compelling reason or it was what compelled me to write my book, which I have to share with you, began as a passion project. It was something I thought, let me just get this out of my head and see where it goes. I told my wife, if this thing sells 1,000 copies, I'll be over the moon. Far eclipsed that in ways that still blow my mind. But that's enough about me. I don't think you didn't come to hear my backstory. But I have given you a minute or two to look at this number. Any guesses what this number might represent? None? Everybody shy? I'll come out there. Who said it? Hours. Somebody say hours? First guy in probably 24 speeches to ever say it. How many, what does it represent? Oh, dang it, you were so close. You guys, on average, in the US, throughout an entire career, these are the number of hours you will work in your lifetime. Invariably, every single talk I give where I use this slide, there's a group that says, he's not a lawyer. He's not a doctor. He's not an insert anything. So there is math behind this. It essentially, it comes from a 40-ish year career, roughly 2,000, 2,100 hours a year. That's the average. So we can argue whether it's 110, whether it's 80, whatever, right? It's a lot of hours. As a matter of fact, it's second only to sleep. Think about that. In your entire existence on this planet, the only thing you will do, on average, maybe some exceptions, more than sleep is work. When you hear that, I hope it compels you to ask different questions. I hope it compels you to think differently about what you do every day. Because you got one chance to do it right. So when I stumbled across this number, I asked even more questions. And if we are to believe what Benjamin Franklin said, that lost time is never found again, are we taking the most time, care, energy? Is our effort where it needs to be for those 100,000 hours? My line of questioning ultimately, so I'm an operations nerd. Spent most of my career leading big operations. So opinions are important, but they don't necessarily move me in terms of my action and how the paths I take from a professional standpoint. So I like the data. So let's look at some data. You guys are familiar with Gallup, the polling company, right? So Gallup every single year releases the State of the Global Workforce Survey. They've done it for well over a decade. They gather information from respondents from around the globe. And a lot of people, over 2 million respondents. And when you get it I get it every single year, and it's free on the internet, you can find it. It's a stack, it's a thick document full of lots of data. But out of that data, I focus in on one or two things. And the first, I think, is really telling. And that question that they ask respondents to weigh in on is, did you experience the following negative emotions a lot of the day yesterday? Not occasionally, not every now and then, not, yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yes, I experienced it a lot of the day yesterday. But what are negative emotions? Stress? Worry? Anger? Sadness? Anger. I like to save anger for last. So you might not be surprised to see that 51% of respondents said, yeah, I felt stress a lot of the day yesterday. I wasn't surprised to see that. As a matter of fact, it's called work. It's not called fun. So there will be stress. And I can actually, if 51% of my team said I felt stress a lot of the day yesterday, I could probably live with that. Worry is a little bit different, but it's understandable. 39%. 39% said, yeah, I felt worried a lot of the day yesterday. But sadness? 22%. 1 in 4. So that would mean 130 of you felt sadness a lot of the day yesterday. Not my opinion, it's what the math says. Essentially 1 in 4. I get really concerned when I think about anger. We've all been pissed off at work, but angry a lot of the day yesterday. Not at some point, but a lot of the day yesterday. 18%. 18% said, I was angry a lot of the day yesterday. So that would be, let's say 1 in 5 in here. Just under 100 of you were really angry at some point. A lot yesterday. So when you aggregate all of this data, I come up with something that I'm now coining the rise of daily negative emotions. And I plotted the data from the very first survey back in 2009 through the most recent report, which, just for semantics sake, we're going to review the 23 report today, which has data from 22 up through the end of 22. So when we get the 24 report, it'll be data up through 23. So the data that we're looking at now is from the last report, the 2023 report. And when you aggregate the daily negative emotions over that period of time, the Plant City in me can't help but share, it ain't pretty. It just ain't pretty, you guys. Go back to 2009 when they first started the survey, 31% on the aggregate of those 4 questions, or those 4 emotions, said, yeah, I felt 1 or more of those 4 in the last, or a lot of the day yesterday. And then the trajectory is what it is. You see that. It's like a hockey stick. And then, holy cow, 2020 rolls around, and we've got the highest number ever. 43% of respondents said they felt 1 or more of those emotions a lot of the day yesterday. All-time high. That's okay, we'll get through it, and it's gonna trend back down. Not so. You can blame the pandemic. So why are the subsequent 2 years been higher? Again, 3 years in a row of all-time highs. So we've gone from this data set that says people are feeling these negative emotions a lot of the day yesterday, and then we look at the aggregate impact, not impact, but the aggregate readout of those same data points, and we see that the path that we're on, where does this end, you guys? Are we here next year and it's 54? Where does it end? And if that's the data, so let's start looking at the why. Why does the workforce feel this way? Why are hundreds of thousands or millions, depending on the data set, responding so negatively? This was a damning statistic that I pulled from the same survey. And I think on the surface, you're like, well, let me just peel the onion back on this illustration. So when asked, or given the statement and asked to rate how strongly you agree all the way down to how strongly you disagree, my company cares a lot about my well-being. Let's look back at 2018. 26% said my company strongly agrees. My company cares about my overall well-being. And it's been up and down, but 2020 rolls around, the pandemic hits, and yes, my company cares a lot about my well-being. They do, they finally care. Because they had to. They had to. You guys, I sent 13,000 employees to work at home in 7 days. We had people walking out of offices with monitors, right? Because not everybody had laptops in those operations, right? We all worked our tails off to make sure our people were safe. Because the alternative to that meant what? We're out of business. So our employees responded with overwhelmingly, compared to historical data, evidence that they agreed, man, my company cares about me. We've turned the corner. Classic case of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Because what we learned after the pandemic, the data started to go back down. And I think the workforce now, having more choices than ever, with work at home being what it is, they have recognized that this utopian approach to one organization for my entire career, maybe two, maybe three, it's not what it was once cracked up to be. And just like the last slide showed us going up, this one's showing us going down. And I think between those two things, we have another reason to ask why. This is all great data. It doesn't tell me why it's happening. This is not actionable data. This just tells me we have a problem. So I know everyone in this group is probably too smart to fall prey to this, so let's just get it out of the way. Must be the money, right? Must be the money. We don't pay our people enough. If we gave everybody raises, all of these data points would be better, and everybody would find more satisfaction and fulfillment in their work. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint the Nelly fans in the room. And thank you for getting my dad joke. It ain't the money, you guys. The brilliant minds at MIT partnered with Glassdoor. You guys clearly know Glassdoor, right? And they created something called the Culture 500. And they released this survey. I think it's yearly. But the data that I want to share with you today is from these two entities collaborating and reviewing 30 million plus online profiles. And the analysis they did was to try to get underneath why people leave their organization. Because they also thought, well, maybe it's the money. The survey resulted in, or this analysis resulted in a couple of other kind of outcomes. And they really did a fantastic job, I think, categorizing why. And again, this is not their opinion, 30 million profiles. Why do people leave? Why do workers leave their organization? Why do they leave their company? Number 3 was a lack of innovation. Number 2 was job insecurity. Number 1, toxic work culture. Okay, we're getting somewhere. We have data. We've got the aggregate data. And now we're learning that toxic work culture, according to these 30 million profiles, and they're really smart people at MIT, they tell us it's toxic work culture. Another question to ask, what's a toxic work culture? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because the same study says, we think we know what a toxic work culture is. And here are the top 4 characteristics of a toxic work culture. Lack of manager support. Unclear communication. Unmanageable workload. And unfair treatment. There is a theme to these 4 checkboxes. My man with the hours guess, what do you think it is? What's the theme? The leaders. The leaders, or bad bosses. Bad bosses. I was that guy. And the math would say, that guy's also in here. But that guy, I would hope, maybe a little bit of inspiration today will compel those of you who are this guy, and it's okay, because I was too. We can get away from this. To ask, is there a better way? Is there a better way? And that brings me back to the epiphany. The epiphany that I stumbled across, I can sincerely and genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, tell you it has changed my life. And I can also very humbly share it has changed the lives of thousands of others. And that epiphany is not a new thing. I didn't create it. You may have heard of principle-based leadership. And as we walk through the next few moments or the next several minutes of our talk, I'm going to go off script. I would encourage you to think through what I'm about to walk through, not only through your professional lens. Because an unintended byproduct that I have felt, and what I hear a lot from either readers or people that I've worked with since writing the book, is these principles have had an even more powerful impact on my personal life. I'll come back to that. But what is principle-based leadership? What does it mean? Well, let's get really specific. Oxford Dictionary says a principle, it's essentially a fundamental truth. It's a proposition, it's the things that we hold to be true. It's our system of beliefs, right? That's a principle. You know, sometimes the word principle gets thrown around different connotations, like, well, I'm so principled that, insert something negative after that. Or out of principle, I'm gonna make sure that blah, 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 blah. We've all done that and said that. I probably the most. But when we think from a team perspective, when we think about aligning a group of people around a common cause, I don't care if it's the bowling team, if it's the chess team, it's the Boy Scouts, the girl, I don't care. If there's a group of people that are aligned around a common cause, if you can get that group of people to get on the same sheet of music, that we have the same fundamental beliefs, and I'm talking about how we operate, how we behave. If we can get a team to align around the same series of fundamental beliefs, that is the foundation of who we are. Darren used the word legacy. Darren used the word legacy earlier. And I'm going to expand on what you said. Leadership legacy. Two words that very few people ever put together. Leadership legacy. We always reserve legacy for people in the spotlight. Tom Brady, people that have a legacy that is irrefutable or undeniable. Everyone in this room has a legacy, and you also, based on the fact that you're here, you have a leadership legacy. We often forget that. We get bogged down in the day-to-day, catching someone doing something they're not supposed to be doing as their leader, more like a boss. We get bogged down in the day-to-day minutia of execution, which is incredibly important, but it's not the only thing. I happen to believe if we focus on execution after we focus on the team and aligning around these principles, the execution comes so much more easily, and it's usually much more fulfilling. So, if we can get a group of people to align around these fundamental principles, which I believe is the very first step in creating what I've coined a culture of excellence. Not necessarily a new term, but something that I lean on a lot. Because I don't want my teams to strive for perfection. I don't want us to even think about perfection. We'll be disappointed over and over. I want us to think about excellence. In everything we do, excellence. But again, another question, what is a culture of excellence? So this is my definition. And I'm going to give you just a second to read that, and then we'll hone in. I want to just kind of drill down into just a few words of this definition. This is Kyle's definition. You may like it, you may not like it, but I think there is a few words that are really, really important. Level playing field in pursuit of aligned personal, professional, and corporate goals. That's a little different take than some organizations might take. It's a little different slant than some leaders might have you believe. They might want to go the opposite direction, starting with corporate goals, professional goals. And oh, by the way, if we can help on your personal goals, we'll do that too. But it's not usually a priority, especially if the team member has expressed interest to do something else out of the organization. That's blasphemy. You can never share with your boss or anyone on your team that you have aspirations to go do something else. I'll come back to that. So if we're gonna build a culture of excellence, and I can maybe convince you just for a moment to think that principle-based leadership and aligning around a series of principles is the way to do it, then now I want to share where the epiphany came from. So I'd left corporate, and I was out. I had no plans. I just knew I couldn't do it any longer. My health wasn't allowing me to. The divorce was almost final. It was time to go do something different, so I stepped away. And I stepped away with the understanding, the personal commitment that I made to myself is I would only go back into the corporate world if I was given an opportunity to lead in a way that I had never been led. If I was given an opportunity to be almost completely autonomous in driving the next transformation. There had always been a theme of transformation throughout my career, both from a leadership development perspective, but also from transforming really toxic, poor-performing organizations into something stronger. Sometimes I made it worse, but mostly was able to really have a good run at it. And the epiphany happened, so I accepted the role. And the night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of my newly inherited leadership team, I was terrified. It's like a gut check moment. It's like, dude, you said you wanted this autonomy, and I had not even learned what principle-based leadership was at this point. The epiphany happened the night before. I had my laptop in my lap. I was still wearing that same day's suit. And I knew I needed to approach this group the next day with a bit of a different approach. They had heard it all, very seasoned group of leaders. They've heard the guy with the shiny shoes. I used to wear shiny shoes. The guy with the shiny shoes and the starched shirt. They've heard all that. So me coming in telling them what I was going to do for them would have gone over like a lead balloon. So about 2 hours later, and I'm about 2 in the morning at Lawrence, and by the way, I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, in a hotel not nearly as nice as this. Government per diem. I created these 10 sentences. And the first word of every one of those sentences was the word we. And it wasn't intentional. There was no muse on my shoulder. And I had no idea. If you would have said, Kyle, 7 years later, you'll be standing in front of the Sarasota Chamber talking about what you're doing right now in your hotel room in Lawrence, Kansas, I would have said, you're crazy. There's no shot. But the 10 we's, the principles that I'm going to walk you through now, which serve as the foundation for my book, and now are my code of conduct for all things that I do, have been so transformative, I feel like it's an obligation to share. Now, two caveats actually. As I walk through these, it never fails, and sometimes maybe it's only in my head, I can hear members of the audience say, no shit. Well, no shit, Kyle. Yeah, of course. That's one caveat. The second caveat is keep an open mind in that one principle on its own is pretty cool. 10 principles that feed and grow from one another, they expand from one to the next, is a lot more powerful. And the principles start with the very, no shit, Kyle, and they become much more and more kind of important, all right? And the first one is the most obvious, but think through any organization any of you have run, been a part of, been associated with, where they have a principle that says to be a part of this team, you will do the right thing, always. And the right thing is very subjective, right? It's different for every scenario, and we can even argue over what the right thing is. I'm limited on time today, but I do go in through like a decision model inside of the book that says, when facing a tough decision or trying to determine your path, consider these, I call them filters, consider these filters when making your decision. And I'm always, no pun intended, purposeful to include that one-word second sentence, always. Because the right thing can feel a little slippery at times, depending on the scenario. We got a lot of pressure right now. We got market forces, we have industry headwinds, we have things that we're dealing with. So the right thing can become a little slippery. But once is too many times, because as a leader, when your team sees you do something other than the right thing, you've now given them license to do the same, and this snowball, this avalanche of not doing the right thing happens. If we align and agree that doing the right thing is the foundation of who we are and what we do, there is one fantastic way to demonstrate you're living this every single day, and that's number 2, we lead by example. I can still hear a few, no shits. I can still hear a few. You're already leading by example. The question is, are you leading by an example that you are proud or would be proud to see it replicated? If it were in the company newsletter or blast all over the internet, my filter's my mother. She's been gone for a dozen years. Still my filter. Lead by example. We lead by example. So if we say we're going to do the right thing and we're going to lead by example, in my mind, the very best way to demonstrate that I'm leading by example is number 3, we say what we're going to do and then we do it. It is a given that we keep our commitments to those we serve externally. That's a given, right? We make a promise to those we serve, it's going to happen. It's less regimented, and there's a lot less discipline on this front behind the curtain. How many times have you asked for something from someone else in your organization because you have to take it somewhere else, you didn't get it, and now all of a sudden your reputation's at risk because someone didn't deliver on their promise? And that was the going in premise that I shared with the team back in Lawrence, Kansas that day was, these are the principles that govern how we treat each other first. I don't care about the external world at the moment, because none of that matters if we're not high functioning behind the scenes. We can be successful, but it won't be sustainable. So this principle is really important internally. They're all important internally, but I think this is a big one. Because your commitments are a reflection of your brand, your personal brand. And those level up to the commitments of your professional brand. But if you're a leader inside of a team and you want everyone to make good on their promises, make good on their commitments, you've got to allow them and encourage them and oblige them to take action. Number 4 is we take action. Taking action and making a mistake, quite all right. But being idle and doing nothing is unacceptable. There's a company that everyone in this room I would venture to guess, most people in this room may own at least one product from this company, and if not, you have at one point in your life. They spend billions of dollars on this slogan. It is how they are known now. And the slogan isn't go win. The slogan isn't just be the best. The slogan isn't anything other than just do it. Just do it. The TSA, the Transportation Safety Administration, has a version, if you see something, say something. In our world, in a culture of excellence, if you see something, do something. Not licensed to be a cowboy and go take over some function that you have no responsibility for, but every one of your organizations is riddled with problems that people are aware of that nobody's addressing for a couple of reasons. One, it usually means more work, so I'm not going to point that out because I'm just going to get more work and probably no extra money. And 2 is, if I am bold enough to take on this action, it doesn't go well, and if I stumble or if we make a mistake and maybe I break something, I'm going to get smacked over the wrist for it, or worse. So if you want your teams to take action, you must live number 5, and that is we own our mistakes. Mistakes are natural. They are part of the evolutionary process in all things on this planet. If you want to get better at something, you usually have to fail at it a few times before you get better. Every single thing in life, there's probably an exception to this, but every single thing in life is the product of overcoming something that didn't go well or overcoming a challenge. So we're going to own our mistakes. In this organization at one point, I had an employee who was responsible for doing our annual reforecasting. So this is when I was leading a $7 billion portfolio that every single year we did a repricing for our biggest client. And the result of that repricing, hopefully, believe it or not, every single year was to reduce their overall total cost of ownership to us. And we were really militant about that because we had learned every dollar we saved this company or this client typically they would reinvest into other areas of our business, right? You guys are familiar with that. So we may lose a little bit here, but we'll pick it up over here. It's a longer term, maybe a higher margin, whatever. That was our approach. This principle has never become more powerful to me than in this story. This fella who was on my team was responsible for this exercise every year. He called me one evening to say, Kyle, dude, we have a $15 million opportunity to take to our client. 15 million bucks we're gonna give back. Ecstatic, wonderful, great job. And he, by the way, he had partnered with a bunch of data scientists. This was a multi-week process that resulted in this savings opportunity. And so I was ecstatic. I went to our client, who is not a very nice person, but I said, today's the day she's gonna be really nice because I got 15 million bucks to give her. She was ecstatic. She said, I need you to do a couple more data checks, go back, sharpen the pencil, and let's see if this 15 is really 14, maybe it's 16 or whatever, but please just do this extra work for us. I said, no problem. Go back to Nick. I said, hey, Nick, man, here's what we got to do. Let's iron this out, but let's go back and prove that it's the right number. You got it. I think it was 2 days later, 8 o'clock at night, the phone rings. Nick says, Kyle, it ain't 15, it's 5. Some of you were thinking, well, shit, you're still giving back 5 million bucks. Our client didn't see it that way. She had already taken that 15 to her superiors. So now she's got egg on her face that we're out 10 million bucks. Nick calls me virtually in tears, certain that that would be his last day on the job, in spite of me communicating these principles. By the way, I should add, Nick is the same guy that at the end of that presentation in Lawrence, Kansas, he asked for the PowerPoint because he wanted to check the properties because he was certain I didn't create it. He thought I'd stolen the principles from somewhere else and I was just passing them on as my own. So I did fire him. I didn't fire him. He called to say he blew it, but he said, hey man, we own our mistakes, right? And I said, yep. He said, hey man, we do the right thing, right? I said, yeah, Nick, we do the right thing. What's going on? He said the 15's 5, and we walked through all of it. He was genuinely expected to be terminated that night. And I shared with him, I have confidence in you. You wouldn't be in this job if you didn't have this, but this can never, ever, ever happen again. Because I truly believe, and I think most rational people believe, we don't judge others for their mistakes. We judge them for how quickly they remedy those mistakes. And does it repeat itself? Or is it repeated? I don't know about you, as a consumer, when a solution provider or your bank or whoever you're working with, when they make a mistake and they go out of their way and run like hell to fix that mistake, I am more connected and endeared to them than I was before the mistake. Because anybody can take on general transactions, but if you screw up and you fix it quickly, I've got your back because you've got mine. But the only way your teams will own their mistakes is if you, all of us, create an environment where it's okay to make mistakes. Nobody's going to raise their hand if they feel you're going to beat them over the head with it. So how do we do that? We got to pick each other up. We pick each other up. And this might seem obvious as well. It's not quite as obvious, though. When we talk about picking each other up, there are really 2 lanes that I'd like you to think about. The first is the obvious one. Everyone in this room, just like everyone on your team, everyone inside your organization, they're all dealing with things that you're not aware of. Some you may be more aware than others. They like to share, but not necessarily all. We all bring baggage to the workplace. We all bring baggage into everything that we do. If we want our teams to be excellent and we want people to feel part of this team and part of something bigger than themselves, you can't turn a cheek to someone that's suffering. You got to pick them up. Because invariably, at some point, you will be the person with your hand like this, regardless of your title, regardless of how senior you are, regardless of your position, you will have your hand up waiting for someone to grab that. Pick each other up. And the second point, I think, is as important, but it's more focused on the leader, more focused on people that are responsible for leading other people. They have authority in the organization. And that obligation is to lift others to new heights. It's not enough to pick them up when they're down. You have to push them and put them in places that they aspire to ultimately reach, even if they don't necessarily want to stay on your team, in your organization. That's the blasphemy part I mentioned earlier. We have this tendency that if someone on our team has expressed their opinion that they want to go do something else, maybe in a completely different industry, we may not say it, but our behavior shows that they're dead to us because they're not helping me forward with this agenda. They're not helping move the business forward because their brain is somewhere else. Those are the people that really need to be picked up. Many years ago, I had a fella on my team come to me and say, Kyle, I've been approached by another organization and I've got a chance to make a whole lot more money. It's a title that you can't match. It's a function, it's a scope you can't match. So I think I'm going to take this job. But I've got a couple more interviews and I think I'm going to get it. And I said, John, how can I help you? Let's look at that resume. We did mock interviews. Dude was ready for his next job. He was ready. It crushed me. I took it personally. This is many years ago. By the way, taking your team's path personally, big mistake. Separate topic, but big mistake. The more personally you take it, the less objective you can be about what really needs to happen and how you can help them. But back to John. So John says, I got the interview tomorrow. I'm going to go crush it. I'm going to come back, and we'll talk about my departure, but I promise you it'll be a smooth transition. John came back. He didn't get the job. He didn't get the job. He was bummed. I was not quite as bummed. He was bummed. But you guys, think of the connection he and I had after that moment. Here's a boss who showed genuine interest in his journey, bigger than what he can do for me on a team. John and I worked together for 14 years after that, 4 different companies. And I don't think that would have happened if it weren't for that. I'm not patting myself on the back, I'm sharing with you an alternative perspective. If someone on your team has a side hustle, they want to go do something bigger and better elsewhere, they see the role that they're in now as an opportunity to pad the bank account, to get experiences, to put themselves in a position to do that thing. You can both benefit from that. Everyone can benefit from that. But if we're going to pick each other up, and I have to say, maybe another caveat or disclaimer, as we turn the corner and go 7 through 10, we're leaving, no shit, territory, and we're now moving on to a little bit tougher stuff. We're going to measure ourselves by outcomes, not activity. The corporate world is full of participation trophies. And in front of you stands one of the most employee-friendly, employee-advocating, like bend over backwards for my employees person you may ever see. But that does not mean I'm going to be proud of them, congratulate them, give them raises, attaboys, attagirls, for staying busy. I do a lot of executive coaching. And every single client, when I first meet them, they wear their calendar like a badge of honor. Kyle, you don't understand how busy I am. I had 13 meetings yesterday. I was back. No one in this room's ever back-to-back, right? No one in this room is ever double-booked, right? We all are. Everybody is. But most people wear it like a badge of honor. They conflate that activity with the impact that they're having. You guys, I am really happy when my Uber driver puts a bunch of gasoline in the car before they come pick me up. I'm so grateful for that. I ain't paying for it. I'm paying to get from A to B. That activity that they undertook before they picked me up is essential to the job, but it's not how they get paid. Another way of looking at this, and maybe a little crass, is we're going to judge ourselves by the money. I don't mean how much, but outcome equals money. And it doesn't necessarily mean a product has been sold and goods have been transferred. It means it's the thing the client cares about. And if you can't draw, and this is really pervasive inside massive organizations, there are people incredibly skilled at keeping their heads down, having no opinion, shuffling from one meeting to the next, and just staying off the radar. What a soul-sucking way to live. What an unfulfilling journey that must be. So I challenge you, and I challenge anyone who will listen to me on this, when you find yourself mired in tons of activity, let me back up. We've all been signed up for, regardless of your level of position, we've all been assigned a series of outcomes, deliverables, whatever's on your annual performance survey or evaluation. Whatever the thing your boss says, got to get this done, right? We all have those outcomes for which we've been assigned. And the challenge is, when you're mired in activity, if you cannot draw a straight line from that activity to any one of those outcomes for which you've been assigned, why are you doing it? Now, I'm not naive. There are compliance obligations and some things that we just must do from an activity perspective that may not directly connect to the outcome, but I think they're the exception. So encourage your teams to focus on outcomes. Outcomes what matters, are what matter. Activity is nice, but it's not why we're in business. My favorite of all of the we principles, but admittedly the most challenging for people to get behind and grasp, is we number 8. We challenge each other. We challenge each other is one of the more difficult ones, because for decades, if not centuries, the only person allowed to issue a challenge was the boss. Challenges were always this way. It's how I led, and I think it's how a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders lead, more like bosses manage, not leaders lead, bosses manage. When you are vulnerable enough and can set your ego aside to walk away from this notion that your title or the level of authority that you have grants you some type of exception from challenge, when you can drop that ego, the reward and outcomes and the performance that you will see out of your teams will be exponential than what you might have seen before. Challenges, to find excellence, challenges must come peer-to-peer, they must come from team to leader, they must come from leader to bigger leader, they must come from every direction. Every direction. There's a reason an NFL team has a 53-man roster, one head coach. It's impossible to think even the best head coaches in the world can inspire, motivate, communicate with, understand, be there for, pick up, and challenge all 53 men. It's impossible. The math says it can't be done. That's why there are assistant coaches. That's why there are support staff. That's why there are position coaches. That's why there are coordinators. And what happens in the corporate world when you embrace this principle is really a beautiful thing to watch. When I introduced this one, I consciously could see my staff meetings, they turned from readouts to discussions, and from discussions to progress. You guys have all sat in these staff meetings, especially if you're the boss. You sit at the end of the table, people sit around the table, and each person gives you their update while every other person's doing this or this, not even really paying attention to what the other person's saying. I get it. The problem with that is every other person who is not speaking, they have intel, they have knowledge, they have a way to help and even challenge the person who is speaking. And I watched this happen because, and by the way, there's no better way for disaster recovery type stuff, for career kind of backfilling, for your succession planning, because the more conversations that you have, the more intimate with the details everyone else on the team becomes. And my favorite example is what I witnessed firsthand is I would see leaders on my team, these are people that were leading thousands of people around the table. I would see those leaders be more open about what's going wrong in their organization because they knew they had to own their mistakes, and they knew everyone else in the room was listening now, and they were going to challenge them if they heard garbage. They were going to challenge them if they heard something that didn't quite jive with what I just heard in the hallway. This one, if you take nothing away from this conversation, this is the one. We challenge each other. But I never close without adding that, again, one-word sentence behind that, diplomatically. Now, let's be clear. Challenges must be grounded in one and or two things: data or experience. It can't be, I just don't think suit and ties are appropriate for that. It can't be your opinion, right? If someone comes to the table and says, hey, listen, I was part of a company that did a product launch very similar to what we're undertaking now, and we followed the same path and we failed, and here's why. That's data. If they come with experience as well, even better. Either way, right? Either way, we have to listen to those who say we're heading down the wrong path. Because how unfulfilling is it to have one person? I use this tour guide analogy in the book. You can be a tour guide or you can be a hiking expedition leader. A tour guide, you guys have all been on those things, right? It's someone that's and to your left is the blah, 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 and you can't even understand them. That's a tour guide. That's the same thing every single day. And you can tell they've done the same thing every single day. An expedition leader is gonna say, wow, there's a fork in the road up there. I'm not sure if we want to go left or right. If we go left, we might have to do, and that's when the challenges start coming. But if we go right, we may not be able to, like that's when the conversation happens, and that's when we find the best outcomes. None of this is possible. We number 8 is impossible without we number 9, we embrace challenge. Whether it comes from someone internally, whether it comes from a market force, whether it comes from your competition, whatever the scenario is, you want the team to be ready to embrace challenge. Without that comes mediocrity. And I mentioned it a few moments ago. Nothing in this world, in this life, is worth having that is not the result of overcoming one or more challenges. Think about it. Think about it. Want to lose some weight? Got to get physical. Got to burn the calories. Want to learn how to play the guitar? Really hard to do. Reps. You've got to practice those things. Overcome those challenges. Embrace the challenges. Part of the journey. It's part of the journey. When you're struggling with either one of these, the thing that I do, the switch that I flip in my brain is, I don't have to go do this. I don't have to go meet with these people today. I don't have to. I get to. I get to go meet with these folks today. I get to do that one-on-one with John. I get to talk to someone and help them along their journey. Embrace those challenges with them. If you've made it through the first 9, the last one I am intentional and have been purposeful to leave as the 10th, because if this one were any earlier, I think it's a recipe for failure, and that is we obsess over details because details matter a lot, right? So we've gone from our fundamental principle, number 1, we're going to do the right thing, always, all the way through to obsessing over details. Charles Eames is an iconic architect, designer, has a quote that I love, is details aren't details. Details are what make the product. I developed a reputation and a nickname of the Shredder. True story, maybe from Nick, by the way. That every time my team would bring a PowerPoint or a deck that I would to take to the board or whoever, client, whatever, I would notice different size fonts. I would notice the spacing and the alignment of the text was different, and I would always send it back. Nope, we ain't taking this. Always send it back. It became the Shredder because I would shred their documents. And at first I was a little offended, but then I noticed the amount of shredding I had to do became less frequent. I had less feedback to give. And the product that this team built, again, if you care most about what's happening behind the curtain first, the product behind the curtain became really excellent, which is impossible to think it doesn't become just as excellent externally. So obsess over the details because details matter a lot. And seemingly small details ultimately can become big problems. All right. You know the 10 W's. You've seen the data. You've learned a little bit more about principle-based leadership and how to create a culture of excellence. The question is, now what? What are we going to do with it? Well, I'm going to run you through 4 quick steps. If we had more time, we'd go deeper in them, but it ain't complicated. Number 1, define your principles. Take the time, put yourself in a quiet room, turn your phone off, turn the lights down, whatever works for you. But who are you? What do you want to be known for? What is your leadership legacy going to be? Everyone in this room, you know this. People are talking about you at their dinner table. Man, Kyle was a real jerk today. I can't please him for anything. Or, Kyle really pushed me today. He inspired me to go pick up this course. He inspired me to be better than I was yesterday. What are those principles? They will define you. But check for gaps. Let's pretend, with incredible humility, let's pretend you leave this room and say the 10 W's are it for me. I hope you do. But if not, find your own. But whatever you find, check for gaps. Are they realistic? Are they who you are? Or if you shared them with your teams or your organization or your wife or your husband or your spouse, whoever, are they going to say, that's not who you are? They have to be authentic. Because when you try to live something that's not you, your team knows it. In addition to your team already knowing your flaws, they already know the things you're not good at, whether you share it or not. So it's really important that they are authentic to who you are. And then be intentional and candid. Share it widely, share it openly, talk about them. Use them in your daily vernacular. Set expectations. What I said to my team back in Lawrence, Kansas that day was, in addition to this is who we are internally versus externally, is I will hold you accountable, so much so that you will be tired of me talking about these principles. And I was so adamant about that because I follow with, and I expect you to do the same to me. If you see me not living these principles, you are obligated to grab me by the ear and call me out. A lot of leaders, me included, struggle with that because that puts me off of this leadership perfection pedestal and puts me on a level playing field. No leadership gap. What's good for me is good for you and vice versa. So set that expectation, be very clear. And when someone's not living it and you see it, and you feel it, and you hear it, you call them out. And the beautiful thing is the more you call them out, the more easy it becomes to not have to call them out. For example, if Darren has dropped the ball on something and I have to have a tough conversation with Darren, I know I can walk up and go, hey Darren, we challenge each other, right? We challenge each other, right? You agree, you're part of the team, you agree to these principles, right? It makes those tough, thanks Darren, it makes these tough, we met about 30 minutes ago. It makes these tough conversations easier to have because everybody is what? Aligned. So set those expectations, be intentional. Then you gotta lead by example, the hard part. I'll share a very quick story on this one. When I introduced those principles in Lawrence, Kansas, one of my direct reports, but by the way, of the 40 or 50 in the room, I would say 50, very similar to what I'm seeing now. 50% of the people in the room were like, yes, this is what we need. A quarter of the room was like, we'll see. All right, we'll see. And the last quarter of the room was like, no shot. This dude is full of it. And one of those people was a direct report of mine, Julia, real name. Julia was about as difficult to me as anyone could be my first several months in this job. My favorite example, I said, hey, Julia, send me the workbook that, whatever the situation was, I needed this Excel workbook. I said, give me that workbook because I'm new to this company. I want to do some analysis and figure out why this impacts that. I just need to connect these dots. Julia sent me a screenshot. The gigglers are Excel nerds like me. You can't use a screenshot. It's not helpful. I said, Julia, come on, man. Could you please send me the workbook? She sent me a tab. Every other tab was gone. So the references weren't there, still not helpful. So I said, come on, man. Could you just send me the workbook? Now, what I wanted to do, I wanted to bang my fist on a desk. I wanted to be a jerk, the guy that I was the previous 20 years. But what would happen if I did that? I am not embracing challenge. Everything's dead. Everything. Here's some guy saying we must challenge each other. Yeah, she was being a jerk and challenging me. She shouldn't have been a jerk, but she was. The challenge was there. I can't stop that challenge from being there. I can stop and control how I embrace the challenge. I will share with you, 7 years later, she is one of my closest friends. I haven't worked with her in 5 years. We still have one-on-ones every 4 to 6 weeks. Because I proved to her that I was more in it for her than my authority. Than flexing my authority. So you gotta lead by example every single day. Check ego is the biggest one. Check your ego, because the ego that says I'm important, I have authority, I'm your boss, that is a cancer. And if unchecked, becomes so bad that you don't even see it any longer. Your teams do, but you'll feel it, but you won't see it. And then the last one is assess for adoption. I think 360-degree skip level surveys, there's a lot. Ask the question though. Ask the question. Don't assume your people are living the principles that they have agreed to live, that they are aligned around. Don't assume. Just check. Ask. And there's a variety of ways to do that. All right. So we've gone from data to why to we to implementation. So the question now is, what do we do? What do we do? If you're ready to run with this, let's go. Run with it. Make it your own. Modify it to be your own. You will find a greater level of fulfillment and passion with the work that you do and the people you do it with that you may have never felt. And if not, at the very least, it will connect you to maybe those thoughts that we all had at the very beginning when we took this journey on to enter the workforce. But all of that, the first thing that has to happen is you got to make that choice. You've got to make that choice. You've got to make the choice to lead or be the leader that you've always wanted, if you're not already, and lead in a way that you have never been led. Treat your loved ones in ways maybe that you've never treated them. Putting their needs, as ironic as it sounds, everyone around you, putting their needs ahead of your own, the fulfillment and satisfaction and accomplishment that comes back to you is undeniable. You have to make that choice. You have to choose we. So that's it for me today. I'm going to hang out back for a little bit afterwards. I would love to shake some hands and say hello. We do have copies of the book if you're interested in that as well. But I want to again close with the most sincere gratitude for the opportunity to chat with you guys today. So go be we. Thank you.
We were so truly honored this morning to have Kyle as our keynote speaker for our annual breakfast here at the Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. I could not believe the engagement and just the command of the room that Kyle had as he spoke to our 500 member businesses. His talk was absolutely engaging, informing, and I'm so encouraged that our businesses have the opportunity to come today to hear from Kyle, learn from Kyle, and that they can take these things, the 10 We's that Kyle shared, back into their own companies. And hopefully our business community continues to grow and is stronger based on what they learned here today.